who you are, what your name is.
I'm Bert McCall, and the day, I won't forget the day I was drafted. I did get my draft notice, and they said there were 85 of us from the city of Memphis, Tennessee, were drafted, and we were all taken down to the railroad station and put on a train.
How old were you when you were drafted?
I was 22, and
what year was this?
This is 1941, February 1941.
Okay.
And they put us on the train to Chattanooga, Tennessee. Well, I tell you one thing I remember is the train went through Florence, Alabama, and stopped there for a moment, and the people of Florence came out and brought us all boxes of fried chicken and biscuits and potatoes and stuff like that, and they're real terrific. I'll always remember those people for that, how nice they were in Alabama. They did that. Well, anyway, the train got to Chattanooga, and I got there that evening, and we were met by we didn't know who they were at the time. They were sergeants, and they had some trucks, and they put us all in trucks and took us to Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia, which was just across the state line from Chattanooga. And we were put up at a CCC camp. Now, what a CCC camp was CCC stood for Civilian Conservation Corps, and it was a corps established by President Roosevelt for young fellows getting out of school that didn't have a job, couldn't find work, and you could go and join a CCC camp, and they'd furnish you clothes and shoes and socks and underwear, and furnish you barracks to sleep in, and they pay you $1 a day. And what you did, you built stock ponds, built small bridges to go up for roads, repaved roads, all kinds of work like that, replanted trees, and even built some buildings. And then, anyway, this CCC camp had been converted to an Army Reception Center. And the 86 of us that were drafted, we were put in that barracks. And next morning we got up, and they took us over to the hospital in Fort Oglethorpe, the old fort, and which was across the road. And we had all those passed the physical. They brought us back, and then that's when they swear you in, right off the bat. You're sworn in. And when that man says, as of this moment, you are in the Army. And then we marched down, and they give us uniforms. Well, most other guys went to the infantry. But there were 5 of us, and why I was one I'll never know, were wound up in the 6th Cavalry, which was in old Fort Oglethorpe. All I had to do was pick up my bag and walk across the road. And the cavalry still had horses, and believe it or not, I was assigned to F Troop with the 6th Cavalry Regiment. And they issue your bridle, and they took away all my old uniforms that were issued at the CCC camp, and give me the cavalry uniform, which was boots, spurs, riding breeches, and campaign hats, and that sort of thing. And we had to learn to ride a horse. I'd never been on a horse in my life, but we learned. And they used to say, it's funny, they used to say, well, which is smarter, the man or the horse? Because the man got 13 weeks training, and the horse only gets 9. So, but anyway, I had no horse, but I only stayed with them a short time. And they took our horses away and mechanized the unit. And then we were given some scout car, what they call scout cars, which was a big old touring car that had been armor plated, and a machine gun was out on the right running board, a machine gun stand, and for some guy to shoot it, he'd have to stand out on the running board, hang on to the side of the car with one hand, and fire it with the other. Now that was kind of, but they had a big old armor plate that went down over the windshield, and that was the first one. And we had some of the very first Jeeps that the Army issued, we had. Now it's a funny thing, a lot of people don't realize this, don't know this, but a Jeep today was originally called a Seep. Now it's called a Peep. A Jeep was called a Peep back then, and a Jeep was a command car where everybody sat forward. And now somehow or another the public caught on to a Jeep, and the Peep got changed to Jeep. Now Seep, I mentioned a minute ago, was about the size of a Jeep, but it was kind of, you could float, it would float in the water. It had a propeller on the back and everything. But anyway, it took my basic training here with the 6th Cavalry, and then I got one day the sergeant making an inspection found a picture I had drawn of a girl, just the head, and she was wearing a big hat, and it wasn't. I didn't think any more about it. He found it in my wall locker, and I got called one day. I got called down to the troop commander's office. I entered to me. He said, "Trooper, did you draw that picture?" And I looked up, and he already had it framed, hanging over his desk on the wall behind him. And I like to fell over backwards, but I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Nice picture." He said, "Could you know anything about typing?" "Yes, sir, I could type." He said, "Well, I see you were a truck driver. You know how to drive truck?" "Yes, sir." "You know anything about engines, automobile and truck engines?" I said, "Yes, sir. I was a mechanic at one time." Anything he said I could do, I said, "Yes, sir, I could do it. I don't care what it was. We assign you to the motor pool." And from then on, I had it made. I had me a little private room down in front of the garage, telephone. I had an office. I had the works. And here I was, just you might say, a recruit. But I had it made, and I took my training with this unit. And there were, we had 8 men who lived in the little, what we call a stable shack, because this is where the stable crew had lived when they had horses. Now the mechanics live there. And we were exempt from guard duty, KP, and all these other extra details, as long as we kept all the vehicles going. That was that included armored cars, trucks, motorcycles, Jeeps, everything we had. As long as we kept them running, why, we could do anything we wanted. And so we did that. We had a good time. And but then the troop left, and we went down to Louisiana maneuvers, and we spent 6 weeks out in the woods. And I mean, when they say Louisiana, they mean swamps. It was swampy. And we did training down there. And we took a Jeep and put it in a rubber bag, floated it across the river, and brought it back. All this kind of stuff.
What all did you do in training?
In training?
Yeah.
We went through all the ranges. We at the rifle range, learned to fire a rifle. First thing you do before you could fire, you had to learn how to take them apart and put them together. And we did that. And after we took them apart, put them together, they took us out on the range, and we fired rifles. Then after we got pretty proficient at that, we learned to fire pistols. We did that. And then the main armament for the 6th Cavalry time was a 37 millimeter, little 37 millimeter cannon, and we fired that on the range. And that was the basic forest firing. That was the training we had then. But it was a beautiful post. It was an old army post at Port Oglethorpe was. And the 6th Cavalry was an old unit. In fact, it had one time fought in the Boxer Rebellion in China, and fought in all the wars, with Teddy Roosevelt and all that bunch. So it was an old outfit, and a real proud outfit. And I was, every man was made proud to serve in it. And the post was small. It wasn't big enough for a division, just big enough for one regiment. And that's all we had in the post was a regiment. And it was the parade ground was one big oval. And the officers at one end and one side was their quarters. And at the other end was the enlisted men's barracks. And up and down the side was the non-commissioned officers' quarters. the staff tech and master sergeant. That's where they lived. And the parade ground was beautiful, kept immaculate. As a matter of fact, on Sundays, the officers used it for a polo field. They played polo. Then after we went to Louisiana, we come back, and after a short time, we were transferred to Camp Blanding, Florida. Well, while we were there, I found out that there was that the Army had put out an order that any man with a high enough IQ and could pass the physical could apply for OCS, which was Officers Candidate School. And you go to that school for 3 months. If you come out, you could come out with the rank of second lieutenant. By this time, I was a sergeant technician. And so I applied for this OCS. And after a while, I passed it. And so a funny thing, I put in for OCS Cavalry, because that's all I knew was the 6th Cavalry. And when I come out, I had to go before a board of officers, 5 officers, a major, 2 captains, and 2 lieutenants. And they could ask you any question in the world. You had to stand there in front of them in your uniform, and your uniform had better be immaculate. I mean, boots polished, trousers, not a wrinkle in them, shirts pressed just so, your hair cut, clean shaven, and you better use your manners. I mean, saluting and yes sir, no sir. And they ask you questions. You had to be prepared for any question. He might ask you, name the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Or he might ask you who somebody was that you didn't even know, or what happened on such and such a date. So you kept up. So prepare for this. I kept up with Newsweek, Time magazines, Life magazines, and read all the newspapers. Make sure I read the newspapers. Kept up with current events. And I went before this board, and I passed it. And I went back to the barracks, and after another couple of months went by, I get a call to come before a second board. And he said, well, we see that you went before a board once before. And he said, the only thing that knocked you out is you applied for cavalry school. And he said, there's an old regulation from the cavalry left over from horse days that a man could not weigh over 178 pounds. And I stood there in front of the guys weighing 200 pounds. And so he said, would you ever think about tanks? And I said, no, sir. He said, why don't you think about it? I said, I will, sir. He said, well, now that you've thought about it, we'll see if we can put you in armor. And it wasn't but a couple of weeks, I was on my way to Fort Knox, Kentucky to armor OCS. And they talk about 3 months. Mister, they call them 90-day wonders. These guys are, and you do. When you graduate, here you are a second lieutenant, and you're wondering what has happened. Because you know you're going to stand out in front of a bunch of men, you're going to take command of those men. And whether you've ever been in a command position or not, it's all the difference in the world. But anyway, when I graduated from Fort Knox, Kentucky, I was assigned to the 92nd Reconnaissance Battalion of the 12th Armored Division. And I stayed with the 92nd Battalion, 92nd Reconnaissance Battalion, and they were transferred from Camp Blanding, Florida, to Camp Barkley, Texas. And here I transferred from the 92nd Reconnaissance Battalion to the 17th Armored Infantry Battalion. And this unit is a unit I went overseas with. And Camp Barkley, they put us on the train at Camp Barkley to go overseas. And the train went straight north from Camp Barkley straight north to Canada. And we went around the Great Lakes and come back down to the United States and wound up in New York, Camp Shanks, which is right across the river from New York City. And I did get to spend 1 or 2 evenings in New York City. Anyway, I was selected to be billeting officer aboard ship. And the ship turned out to be the Empress of Australia, That was the name of the ship. And it had been originally built to serve as for Hitler to review the British fleet when he captured the whole thing. But as you know, this never happened. So the British got the boat. They captured, took it back, and they fitted it out. And they were going to use it at one time for the Queen, but she never. But then the war broke out, so they turned it into a troop ship, and it was a big ship. And I was building officer, so I went aboard, and the guy says, the ship's officers, I told him what I had to do. I got to be sure there's a bunk for everybody. So what every unit had, I got a whole bunch of colored chalk, and I just started at the gangplank. Whatever, if you were, and made a red line from there all the way up and down steps, wherever you had to go. And this is what, when a troop come aboard, I said, well, you follow the red line, you follow the blue line, you follow the yellow, and everybody could just go right to the place. And after I got that done, it took me a couple of hours. And after I had that done, then I thought, well, I'll just see a little bit of New York, man. I still got some time left. So I went down the gangplank, and this MP sitting down there, he says, where do you think you're going, Lieutenant? I said, I'm going to New York City for kind of get my last beer. He said, well, I'm sorry, sir. He said, but you've set foot in the United States for the last time. And all I could do was turn around and go back up the gangplank. And sure enough, it worked. And we went on out we got out to sea, and we joined, I guess, one of the biggest convoys that ever crossed the ocean. Just as far in front of me and as far behind me as I could see were ships in line. And both sides was just ships lined up, one behind the other. And and on each side, of course, the United States Navy has supplied some destroyers for escort, and as far as the planes could go out, they covered overhead. And then, of course, they could only go so far. And then when they broke off, then when we got close to the other side, then the British corvettes, the British Navy sent that corvette out to escort us in. And we landed, the ship I was on landed at Liverpool, England. And we went into Liverpool, and they put us on trains. And we wound up at a little camp called Tidsworth. And from Tidsworth, we got on a train, and I got a couple of 3-day passes to London. Now, like this. But then we got, time come for us to go. They moved us to Southampton. And we got aboard these LSTs, which is a big ship that the doors open on the front and the ramp drops down, and we load tanks in and artillery and everything else. And we moved, under cover of night, we moved across the channel. And believe it or not, we had to sit outside the shore 4 days before we could get in. That's how many ships were going in and coming out. And with these LSTs, they run them up on the bank, and about half a mile out, they get under full steam, and they drop anchor, the rear anchor, and then they run up on the bank, and then you open the door, drop the ramp, your tanks go out, and you go out on dry ground. And then when they get ready to back off, they raise the ramp, close the door, and then they wait for high tide. When high tide comes in, they reel in that rear anchor, and that pulls them back out into the water. It's a good system. Anyway, we moved from there to a place just about 20 miles out of Reims. And because I wasn't in the first wave, I wasn't that kind of. They had already established a beachhead and was already pretty far in. And we went into Reims, and where there was a big chateau there that was in an H shape, and the our Air Force had just knocked out the middle, just tore the whole middle out and looked like 2 buildings. And also there was one of these German V-1 rocket launchers, was still standing. Of course, the Germans didn't have any more because I don't know what they did for launches, but they didn't use that one, that's for sure. Then from there we moved up to the front, and we did go. I won't forget the first night that we were in half tracks, moved up on front, and man, you hear the artillery whistling over. And then I had an old sergeant who'd been in combat before. He says, "Lieutenant," he said, "don't worry about it." He says, "If you can hear it, it's already gone." And it's true, if you can hear it, because they travel faster than sound. And if you can hear it, you don't have to worry about it. It's not going to get you. He said, "You won't hear the one that gets you." And so we was online for a while. In my little platoon, we was always formed out with a tank battalion, and we always would say, well, we would when I had to work with a tank company, a tank platoon, he'd say, I'd tell the command, I said, well, look, we would like to go either 150 yards in front of you or 150 yards behind you, because you and tanks draw artillery fire. And we're standing out here. If we walk in between your tanks, we're the ones going to get killed, not you. And most of them were pretty well agreeable. And it was pretty nice. And we lost quite a bit of our company, though. And through these little towns. And we did mostly town fighting. It wasn't too much cross country. It was mostly taking towns. And when you go hand-to-hand combat through buildings, I think it's a little rough because you don't know who's in the next room or who's around the corner. And, so we did that. And one time I won't forget, we were on the south flank of the United States 7th Army, and we butted up against the north flank of the French First Army. And I don't forget that they had an officer call one time. They said, can anybody here speak French? And of course, being a wise guy, I said, oui, je parle français. He said, okay, Lieutenant, you can be our liaison officer with the French First Army. That's about all the French I knew. It was. Anyway, I did. They introduced me to a French lieutenant, and he and I had a jeep. We'd keep the front coordinated between the south flank of our division and the north flank of his French First Army Division. Make sure one of them didn't take it too far out in front of the other one. We stayed on line. And we went into this town one time, and met this French captain, and told him that this battalion, our battalion, had orders to attack this little town, which is about 400 or 500 yards down the road. And he said, what time are you going to attack? And we said, we're going to attack at 0700 hours. He said, well, if you're going to attack at 0700, we'll attack at 0600 hours. And we told him, so you're not supposed to attack at all. You're being relieved. You're supposed to draw back off line, rest. He said, this is my country. I attack. And of course, he took his outfit and went down the road. And when he got down the road, the Germans had a machine gun there set up right at the crossroads, and they cut him to pieces. And here they come back, all messed up. And so then, when he come back, then we took off at 0700 hours and attacked this little town, and we chased the Germans out. And I won't forget, it was just before you got to the town, it looked like it was a field. It may have been, I don't know what it was, corn, maize, or something. They were growing in this field. And we was down on our stomachs, and it was about 2 or 3 inches of snow. And I had a gun. We called it a grease gun. It was a machine gun, but it was a submachine gun. And it looked like a grease gun that the guy uses to grease your car with. That's the reason we called them grease gun. And I got mud and stuff down the barrel, and you put the barrel in your mouth and suck it out because you don't want you want to make darn sure that that thing will fire when it's time comes to go off. And another time, there was a big spa. It was a big health club, something like a beautiful place, set up on the side of a mountain, and we was up in that place and sitting out on a big patio and lawn chairs, watching a battle go on down at the foot down to the bottom across the valley there. You could see the battle and who's firing at who and all that stuff, and it's just like watching this show, a big panoramic play. Well, anyway, this one time we had put in those 3 bridges, like I was talking, 3-foot bridges we had to put across the canal. And our platoon was split up into 3 units, 3 groups, and we took off across one night. It was night, it was about, I don't know, 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. We took off about 200, 300 yards to this canal. And we took off from this little town and going across that field, and it was about 3 inches of snow and it was cold. And an artillery round took out one of the bridges and the men carrying it. And we finally got one 1-foot bridge in. And when we did, I ran across that one bridge and we found this one German lieutenant and an enlisted man, I believe he was a sergeant, laying across what we called a burp gun. It was a little machine gun. We called it burp gun because their gun, the cyclic rate of fire of their gun was, double ours or more. In fact, our guns would fire about 400 rounds a minute, and theirs fired 1,000 or better. And anyway, the sergeant he kicked one of them in the fanny. The lieutenant, when he did, these guys weren't dead. We thought they were dead laying there. But he wasn't dead. He stood up, put his hands on his head, both of them did. And that's where we got a map case, and that's where I got the pistol. Yeah, that P-38 right there.
The P-38 that you took from the German.
P-38. And that's it right there, see. And it's a nice weapon, very neat weapon. And you can tell the bore is smaller than ours. Anyway, I got that and a map case. And I sent the map case back to headquarters, and that's my souvenir. And but we got, and then after that we got called back. After we got the bridge and everything, we got called back because about 300 or 400 yards the other side of that canal was a rise in the ground that the railroad track went across the top of it. And the Germans had 88 guns set up, as 88 millimeter guns. And those guns, I guess, were the finest guns in World War II. I hate to say this, but they were. They were better than any gun we had. And we had 90 millimeters, we had 105 howitzers, 105 guns in artillery, but they had an 88 that they could use it to shoot at anything. If they see one man walking out there in front, they could hit him. Long barrel, I guess you call it a cannon, whatever you want to call it. And the gun's about that big around. And anyway, what it was, the breech end of the barrel of the tube was bigger than the muzzle end, and it kind of tapered down a little bit. And what it was, when the shell was fired, it squeezed out through the tube, and when it come out the barrel, the muzzle end, it popped like a champagne cartridge, and it fired. That round was going a lot faster than ours we had, and it was a beautiful gun. But the Americans never did adopt it, even after the war. And I thought it was better than anything we ever had. That's my opinion now. A lot of people may not think so. But that was then we went on another mission, and then I don't know what happened. I woke up in the hospital in Nancy, France. And
what had happened?
I don't know. I was out. I was going across the field, and all of a sudden, things went black. And then I went out, and I woke up in the hospital. And to tell you what happened, I couldn't. Like they say, they want to get you, you're over here.
What had happened to you?
I don't know. I had a little thing in the back of my head, and got a split lip. Really, you can't see it now. But I woke up there, and I spent, oh gosh, almost a month in the hospital. And from the hospital, they figured the Allies had advanced into Germany just so far that they figured that the war wasn't going to last too long. Somebody knew something. So instead of sending me back up front, they assigned me to going through replacement depots. I was assigned to the prisoner of war camp enclosure, PWEA-1. We had a little over 100,000 German men, and right at a little over 500 women prisoners. The women had been tank drivers, ambulance drivers, German jeep drivers, and they did other things. I don't know what they did, but they even fired weapons. Don't kid yourself. The little girls were real. They would be mean. And but another little thing. I won't forget one time that I was walking the fence line checking a guard. I was officer of the day this day. And I smoked at that time. And I pulled out a cigarette and lit it, and the voice behind me said, would you let me have a cigarette, please? It's just perfect English. And I turned around and looked, and I couldn't see anybody on the other side of the fence. Near me was a German prisoner. And he stunned me so that asked me for a cigarette. I gave him one. And now I gave him a cigarette, I lit it for him as I lit my own. And he told me, he said, you know something? He said, you Americans are great warriors. He said, you win battles and you win wars. He says, but the reward for winning a war is peace. And he said, here is where you fail. He said, you know how to handle a war. He said, but you don't know how to handle peace. You think about this. And he said, he told me, he said, it'll be about 15 years, maybe 20. He said, you and the Russians will be fighting. Well, you know that Cold War went on for a long time. And it wasn't long while I was at this prisoner of war camp that Mr. Roosevelt, Mr. Stalin, and Mr. Churchill got together, and they split up Germany. Well, when they did that, this prisoner of war camp wound up in the British zone. So the British came in, take over this camp, and we moved out. And I was put on a train and sent to another replacement depot in northern France. And I wound up with an ordnance depot just out of a town, well, two towns, which is one on each side of a river. Charleville-Mézières, you can look it up on the map. And with an ordnance depot, and I was a supply officer for them. And being the junior officer, the lowest rank officer, I got all the details. Made supply officer, and I had to be payroll officer, pay the troops, and anything else. Well, I was told to make an inventory of this depot, which took me about a month with a platoon of men. And when that was done, the commander wanted to know how much was missing, what was short. How much? I said, well, about $60 million worth. Because his outfit had never been in combat. They still had to account for everything they had. But anyway, I surveyed all this stuff when I found that one of the trucks had been within mile or two of the front line. I surveyed it all on that truck. And I took it down to Reams to the headquarters, and they approved it. Why, I don't know. They approved it. And I took it back, and that's when he offered me a promotion to first lieutenant. And then I was made, of course that takes time. You can write up the recommendation, but you just don't get it the next day. It takes months before you get it, before it comes back, because it's got to be approved by the Army and Pentagon and I guess Congress or what. They approve all this. So I came back. Then one day went to pay, and I came back, the pay officer came back with money, and he's being in line. This man says, "Hey, congratulations, Commander, congratulations, Commandant." And I walked in the office, and I said, "What the devil are these guys talking about?" Well, he said, "You've been transferred." He said, "You're now the commander of that prisoner of war camp down the road." He said, "Since you've had prisoner of war experience, they made you commander." And I went down to a little prisoner of war camp, real nice. I don't know who put it together, but they did a beautiful job. There were a little over 2,000 German prisoners in it. All of them screen technicians, mechanics, and they were working for an ordnance depot, or this very same ordnance depot. What we were doing, the war was over this time, and they were taking maybe 2 or 3 old wrecked out trucks and making one good one out. Whatever it took, they'd take pieces out of these vehicles and put in those and make good ones out of it. That was the job. And so it was. I had a good time. I had it, and the guards on this camp were Polish soldiers from the Polish Army. And they couldn't speak English. I couldn't speak Polish. And I had one guy who could speak Polish, and he was the interpreter. And so the Poles, they have no use for the Germans, because as you know, Hitler had his troops march through Poland, and he killed an awful lot of Poles. And the Poles, they just looked for any excuse to get revenge.
They hated the Germans.
Oh, with a passion, they hated the Germans. They had a nice little camp. We had and they kept it immaculately clean. I had 2 men that I'd let go out on weekends. One of them was a chaplain. He was a colonel in the German Army, and he had his assistant. They could go out and pick flowers for their church service, and he was the only ones allowed out of the camp when they weren't working for the ordnance. And it was nice. They had the building. It wasn't a building. It was like a big long tent, arranged in a U shape. And at each corner of the U was a kitchen, and they had a 55-gallon drum. That's what they cooked in. Everything. I don't care what you give them, meat, vegetables, what, went in that drum, and it was boiled. And I asked them why they did that, and they said, well, just to make sure every man got an equal portion, because they had a dipper, and every man got a full dipper full for meals. And no man was ever kosher. One guy couldn't say, well, he got more than I did. And but they did real well. They built a boxing ring in the middle of the, and they had fights. I mean, good ones too. I mean, and they had, well, they worked out gymnasium type stuff when they weren't working for the ordnance. And they had, they'd steal little things from the ordnance. Like they'd steal a flashlight bulb and a couple of flashlight batteries, and they'd mount, it wouldn't do, and mount them on a stick with a light on one end and the batteries on the other, little piece of wire running between the two, and they could turn them on and off when they wanted to by touching wires. And they had a sewing machine. One of them he may have been a tailor in civilian life, but he kept all the uniforms sewed together in pretty good shape. Another fellow had been a cobbler, and we took old automobile tires, old truck tires, and they used to resole their boots. And so it worked out real well. They had as I said, they kept it immaculately clean. There were no beds. They slept on the floor on pallets. And these were made up every morning. Every blanket was in place. And some of them had pillows. Those that could scrounge around and get one. But I kind of hated to leave that duty because I had it, but then I had a son at home, almost 2 years old, I'd never seen. So I was ready to come home when time come.
Were there any attempts by the Germans to escape from the camp?
Yeah, there was. The fact is, I had two Germans, two of them escaped one time from the little camp I was commandant of. They escaped from the camp and went into Germany. And it wasn't but about 10 days, maybe a week, 10 days. They came back, wanted back in the camp. And they said that they got more food and better place to live in the prison than the civilians are having out there. Because when the war was over, man, Germany was sacked. I mean, the Allies didn't leave much, but the Russians didn't leave anything. When they came in, man, they came in for blood, and they got it. So from then on, we didn't have much trouble with the prisoners trying to escape. And as I said, I had myself, and I had 9 enlisted men, and the 222 Polish soldiers, and we're the ones that run that camp. And at that time, I had it made because all I had to do was go in the morning at about 10 o'clock. My first sergeant had my morning report made out, signed my name, and my day's work was done. And he was an old boy that could scrounge anything. But we had it pretty well made. It was soft. And when our boys, the 9 men, whenever they wanted to play volleyball, they put a German prisoner on each corner of the volleyball court, and if the ball went out somewhere, but send a German to go get it. let him go chase it. And we had my sergeant and myself one time, we were on some river in Germany. This was on a weekend. We went over to Germany, and we saw this beautiful boat. I know it was around 22 foot long. It looked like a small yacht. It was painted gray. And the sergeant said, that sure would look good over next to the camp, wouldn't it? I don't know what he did. He found a trailer, hooked it onto the back of the Jeep. We backed it down, and he took that big boat and cranked it up on that trailer with a winch. And we brought that old boat over to and put it in the river over in Charlottesville, and we found out we had a couple of German men been in the German Navy in the prisoners, and they kept that boat polished and shined for us and kept it painted. So we had that made. The time come when everybody was thinking about going home, and of course I thought about it too. And I wanted to come home, at that time, to come home, you had to have points. I'm going to come home on a point system. You got a point for every month you were in service, a point for every month you were overseas, and a point if you, well, I don't know how many points, got points if you were married, and points if you had for each child you had. And I knew I had enough points, figuring all this up, to come home. So I couldn't get any order, so I got my Jeep and went to headquarters, where it was over all the little prisoner of war camps in that area. And I told them, I said, about points to go home. Well, they found out, checking my records, according to them, I wasn't married and didn't have any children. So I finally got it straightened out. And when I got it straightened out, then I could go home. And they issued some orders to let me go home. And I finally found, I had to find somebody to take my own place. Now, can you beat the Army telling you that? Somebody telling you got to take your own place in the Army? How do you find somebody to do that? Well, this ordnance depot that your prisoners work for, I found a lieutenant who was with them, and I talked him into taking over the camp and getting him to publish orders for him to have it. And then I got ready to leave. When I got my orders, I was ready to go. Well, I had a little sergeant, and told him I was getting ready to go, and he says, "Don't worry about a thing, Lieutenant." He says, "We'll take care of everything." And the morning he said, "You just come down here the day after tomorrow." He says, "We'll have you all situated." Well, I went down to the prisoner war camp, and there was 3 Jeeps lined up. And the first one, he and I got in. The second one, he had another GI, one of my other men, and 2 prisoners. And the back one just had 3 prisoners in it. We had 5 prisoners, 5 German prisoners, and we took off in convoy. Now this sounds crazy. Of course, you know the war was over now, and so we didn't worry too much. If a guy, one of these prisoners escaped, that was one less mouth we had to feed, so we really didn't care. And anyway, we went down to Marseille, to Camp Chesterfield, and they named all these camps, debarkation camps, after cigarettes. There was a Camp Lucky Strike and a Camp Chesterfield. And so anyway, I got there, and so the sergeant says, "We're trying to find out which tent you're going to be in." Well, I went in and found out. They had the tent so and so, and I walked to the tent and said, "This is going to be it." Well, I hadn't been there for just a few minutes when all of a sudden there was a commotion on top of the tent, and there was a German prisoner up there on top of my tent dropping a wire down through. Now, none of these tents had electric lights. But when this German prisoner finished, this sergeant come in, he says, "Lieutenant, which bunk is yours?" And I said, "This one." He says, "Where do you want your light? You want the light at the head of the bed?" I said, "Sure." So he had this German prisoner install a light over the head of my bed. And I turned around, and there was 2 or 3 colonels and a couple of majors in the tent with me. And he asked him, he says, "Do you gentlemen care for a light over your bed?" "Well, sure." So they put lights over all our bed, and we had the only tent in that whole camp with electric lights. Well, I was there just a couple of days, and then I was gone. But when they were putting me in place, they unrolled this sergeant had one of the prisoners unrolled my bedroll on this cot, did that, and I had sheets on it. I had pillows with a pillow. I even had pillow slip with lace around. It was funny. And then he came in, put my bag under the bed, and then he brought a full case of scotch and slipped it under the bed. He said, "Thought you might like a drink before you left." So, sure enough, I asked these other officers if they'd care to have a drink before dinner, and they all accepted. And then the next day, they had an officer's call. And this colonel in charge of the camp said, "Anybody trying to get aboard ship with any kind of firearms, weapons, or any kind of intoxicating liquor is going to be scratched. They won't go home." Well, gee, I had all kinds of stuff. So I pitched a party that night in the barracks, and had invited everybody. And it didn't cost me a dime, because I'd collected all this stuff. And next morning, we fell out, and this colonel said, "Where's Lieutenant McCall?" And I said, "Right here, sir." He said, "You'll be the inspecting officer for firearms and weapons and intoxicating beverage." I said, "Oh, Lord." And he had done used mine up. So I grabbed hold of the first sergeant I could find, and I told him, I said, "You run down to all these tents where the enlisted men were, and I said, you tell those guys in 30 minutes I'm going to be around. And if they got any kind of weapons, bayonets, pistols, any kind of souvenirs like that, hide it. I don't want to see it." And they, and would you believe it? I went down the row and looked at these guys, and guys Stuff was just laying all around, and I bet you I collected a bushel basket full of stuff. Whole bayonets. And these guys wanted to take them home. I said, didn't you understand I was coming? Yes, sir. Well, why didn't you hide it? Well, I didn't know what. I said, man, you could have dug a hole in the ground in the camp, in the tent. There was just dirt flowing. Had it. You could have wrapped it in a cloth, anything. I said, I'm not pulling bunks down. I'm not opening anybody's bags. Just hide it. I didn't want to see it. And yet there's stuff laying all around. And I bet you I collected. I had to take it once I saw it. I was just obligated to. But anyway, next day we got aboard, went aboard the ship. Oh man, you talk about great news. And we sailed out through it. We come out through Gibraltar and home that way. And I won't forget the ship as long as I live. It was a small ship. It was a Victory ship. Produced during the war. They produced hundreds of them to haul cargo. And these ships, they converted the cargo space into troop ship. So, put bunks in it for the guys in hammocks and stuff. So on the way home though, every meal they served hard-boiled eggs. And my Lord, you talk about a mess. The guys usually got sick on hard-boiled eggs. And would you believe it? We landed at Newport News, Virginia, where the ship docked. We got off, and the first meal on land, you know what they had? Hard-boiled eggs. And the guys just stood back and threw it to cook through the hard-boiled eggs. Man. But they were real nice. They had a big, huge room, and all around the outside was the inside, the walls was nothing but telephone booths. And they had a few rows of telephone booths in the middle. And in the middle of the room was a counter, and there were some girls there. And we walked in. You want to call? You want to call home? What's the number? Well, go to booth number so-and-so, and first thing you know, the phone will ring, and they called home for you. Didn't cost us anything. They called everybody who landed there had an opportunity to call his family home. And I thought that was real great. And anyway, since I'd been in the hospital overseas, come back, I had to come through, after going through all the physical inspection, the last guy I went to said, Lieutenant, said, sit over there, he said, we'll have an ambulance come for you in just a minute. Gee, what for? He said, that's my orders. So sure enough, an ambulance came. He took him to the hospital at this was at Fort Knox, Kentucky. And I got in the hospital, and I told that old boy at the hospital, the captain who was in, well, I went in, there was a WAC sergeant. And the WAC sergeant, I told her, I said, look, I said, there's not a thing wrong with me. She said, I know, Lieutenant. She said, I got 2 wards of you fellas back there, nothing wrong with. What we got is check you out before we let you out of the Army. So I went in, there was a captain in charge of the ward, he's a doctor. And I told him, I said, Captain, look, I have got 1 day's bad time. And I said, but I'm going to tell you, I think it's 3 weeks to Christmas. And I'll tell you where I'm going to be Christmas Day. I'll give you the state, the county, the city. I'll give you the street number, name, and even the phone number if you want it. But that's where I'm going to be Christmas Day. He said, I believe you mean it. I said, I do. So he put an immediate action on top of my file. It still took me 6 days to get out of that hospital. But anyway, I was tickled to death to go home. And the wife came up to meet me at Fort Knox, and we were able to finagle a deal where we could live at the officers' club, and I went to the hospital every morning, and they'd take a few tests, take a few specimens, and then we had the rest of the day off. And it took us 6 days to do that, but it sure was good to come home.
How long had it been since you since you had gone and then came back to the United States?
Oh, it was almost 2 years. Because see, when I got back, my wife and I got back to Chattanooga. When I married her, while I was in the Army, we actually got married at Port Camel, Kentucky, when I was Camp Camel then, when I was with the 12th Army Division, 92nd Recon. And when I got back, I had a son almost 2 years old. I'd never seen. He was born when we docked in England. And the way I found out about that was I got a letter from my brother, one of them V-mail letters. And he wrote on it, he said, "Dear Bert, congratulations on my new nephew." And then that's when I knew I had a boy. But see, I wrote a V-mail letter home and asking her, "Is everything all right? Are you all right? Is the baby all right?" And but she went down to even the Red Cross wouldn't let her send me a letter back to me because it wasn't an emergency. They wouldn't send a wire, telegram, or anything. They said, "You all right?" "Yes." "Baby all right?" "Yeah." "It's not an emergency then." So they wouldn't let her send me a wire or anything like that. But that's the way I found out about it. But anyway, when I got home, boy, I don't think anybody had a homecoming like I did. There wasn't any bands playing when we got off the ship, but it sure was great. All these little old things that you like to tell you, we don't ever forget. Like
Yes, like speaking of things that you don't forget, I was gonna ask you, what was it like? I know that you witnessed death in the war. What were some of those experiences, and what were those like?
Well, it's
what were your feelings, and what did you see?
Well, well, the first time you're a little awed by it especially the first time you see. Well, the first one that I ever saw was I saw two dead Germans laying on the side of the road as we went up the road in a half track, and looked over the side, and there was these two bodies laying there. I mean, you get one thing: anytime you see any bodies that's been laying there for a while, if you didn't see them shot out, don't touch them, because the Germans had a good system of booby trapping their own bodies. Here you see a guy with a body laying there with a beautiful wristwatch on. Well, he might have a wire attached to that wristwatch you can't see, and under it, and that happened. That is kind of sickening, and especially when you see your own boys get cut down. That's what hurts. And like I told you, I had one sergeant. He when he was killed, I saw him killed, and that was hard to take because he was a nice, clean-cut fella, young fella, and just as nice a guy as you'd ever want to meet. And he was hit with a piece of shrapnel, cut him up pretty bad, and that wasn't bad. The bad part was getting a letter from his mother, and she gets a letter saying he's missing in action, and I know he's not missing, he's dead, and wants to know what's happened to her son. Well, yeah, try that and emphasize. All I could do was give the letter to the chaplain and tell him the circumstances, and "Chaplain, could you handle it?" He did. I guess he did. He said he would. But I'll tell you well, yeah, those chaplains did a marvelous job. And the medics did too. We had a doctor attached to our outfit, and this old doctor, when we was up on line, you dig foxholes. When you're going to stay in a place a long time, or any time, you start digging. You dig in your hole to get into. And I had an old sergeant, so he'd tell everybody, he said, "Boy," he says, "you dig that hole like you're going to spend the rest of your life in it. You make it comfortable." He said, "Because you just might be doing that." And then we had a doctor. And the doctor would take a bag, one of the backpacks like we carry, and he would fill it full of socks. And he'd run from foxhole to foxhole. How your feet wet, your feet damp, because we had awful problems with trench foot. And we had to tell him, Doc, get down, get down. You're telling the enemy exactly where we are. Every time you stop, he knows there's a man there. And we had to chase him off the front line. Because he'd stop at every foxhole. Hey, your feet wet, your feet damp, take these socks. He's a good old boy. I guess it's kind of choppy out. What else to tell you? And we come home. It was quite a deal. I went in there February 41, come out in December 45. And that was, but I didn't do too bad, you know. I went in a draftee, basic private in the horse cavalry, and came out a first lieutenant at that time. So that wasn't too bad for an old boy. But you tried everything you do. Anything, try the best. When I went in, we had to take everybody had to take I guess you'd call it a written test, written examination. IQ test is what it was. You take an IQ test. And that's the only way I got my commission. Or one of the ways, because my IQ test was high enough for me to get a commission. Because I tried. I had guys sitting next to me taking the same tests. And they'd, what are you doing working so hard? I said, well, I want to pass this. He said, what for? He said, they're not going to fire you. You know, if I just sign my name, he said, they'll keep me in the Army. Sure, they'll keep me in the Army. But you'll always be a private, too. You don't get anywhere. And when I was an enlisted man, I used to see these officers walking around with these polished boots and man, dressed up sharp. And like they say, rank has its privileges. Well, the Army is, and of course, after I got my commission, I was welcomed in the officers' club, and I had all kinds of, as I said, privilege. You know, you sat at the officers' table in the mess, and you went to the theater. There was reserved seats for officers, that kind of stuff. And I enjoyed that. But you earn it. You earn it when you, because there's nothing come out every week. They give, when we were training, they give a program. The company commander would put out and your name would be on the list always to teach 2 or 3 subjects. I won't get the first subject I ever had to teach. He said, tomorrow. Can you imagine? Tomorrow, you will have a 4-hour class in the 81 millimeter mortar. But good Lord, usually if you're going to do any kind of teaching, they say you'd spend 1 hour for every minute you're going to talk. 1 hour research, 1 hour studying. Well, Lord, here it was the night before, and I'm going to get to teach 4 hours tomorrow? And don't you think I didn't burn the midnight oil catching up? I'd already used a mortar before, but to get the fine details of it, how to aim the weapon and how to set the sights and how to put it together, take it apart, that kind of stuff. Yeah. My feelings about it?
Yeah. What was your attitude towards the war?
Of course, this was a war for, the war had been declared. Now, as you know, the United States, when we started the war, the United States had practically no equipment to talk about. We had no guns. I mean, at the beginning, some of the GIs, draftees, when they go in on maneuvers, would use wooden pistols and wooden rifles, and you had nothing to train with. So the U.S. had to get in right fast and manufacture these things. Some of them were good, some of them weren't. And I guess one of the finest things we ever produced in the war was a Jeep. And that, of course, we still use them today. We're still making them. But we had nothing. And then when they bombed Pearl Harbor, and that was the day we was declared war on Japan. But we couldn't fight instead of fight. Then we had to fight on both fronts, the Japanese and fight the Germans. And just the British were the Britons and the English were asking us to come in and help them. They was about to sink because the Germans were bombing the fool out of England. And we went in there, and the best thing we did was our Air Force went in there, and the Air Force cleaned them out. And those guys worked good. When they say, and you read, that the Air Force put it over 1,000 planes in the air at one time, mister, they did. I've seen bombers fly over these B-17s just as far as you can see in front of you and just as far as you can see behind you, and 10, 12, 15 lanes wide. Just row on row, just keep coming over. And boy, you just feel sorry for the Germans on the other end of that bomb run because they were going to get it. And those guys got real good at the end. The only funny thing though is when the Germans come out with that they were the first to have the jet airplane, you know. We didn't have jets. And there was one day there was watching 3 or 4 P-51s fly over, and this jet came in, and when these P-51s turned to get him, he took off like a scalded rabbit, and those 51s, one of the finest airplanes in the war, couldn't even touch him. They couldn't even get close to him. But he was gone. But the Germans had a problem with that plane because they're one of the first ones ever built, and they didn't know how much fuel it was going to consume. And evidently the guy could just come over there and fly and make a circle once or twice, and he had to go back because he was out of gas, out of jet fuel. But the Germans did have that, and they built, as I said, they built the V-1 rocket, which was the one that had wings. And when I was in London, I was in England a few times, and they'd fly over, and you could hear those things sputtering. They just sputter and just hum, and you watch that thing, and when you stop sputtering, that's when everybody had to duck because it head down, and nobody knew where it was going to land, where it was going to hit. When it did, it was like a blockbuster, just boom. And then after that, the Germans invented the V-2, which was just a big rocket. And it went way a high trajectory thing. It went straight up and went over and come straight down. And it made no noise, and there wasn't a thing you could do about that. When it hit, good Lord, it was a mess. And I've seen the British sleeping, and so they slept in subways. They could care less. You could go down the subway. Their subway trains still run, and they called it the Underground. And they'd be, some of them be sleeping in bunks. They'd have bunks right out there on the station platform, and that's where they slept. It's the only safe place. They slept at home. They might get bombed. They didn't know whether, because these bombs fell, they didn't know where they were going to fall. The Germans knew they would fall on London, but they didn't know where in London. And it was quite an experience. I got, while I was in London, though. Of course, it was wartime, and I went by the Palace, Queen's, Buckingham Palace. I went by there, and of course the guards didn't have the high fur, bear fur hats and the red tunics, and they were all dressed in GI with the steel helmets. And I got to see that. And I got to go through Westminster Abbey, and in fact, I got to attend a service in Westminster Abbey, and I got to walk around and look at the thing under the floor. Each one of these big concrete slabs, probably a king or a bishop or something was buried under there, and his name and the dates and all that was in it. And I got to something that a lot of teachers would love to have, and I got to walk around what they call Poets' Corner, where Shakespeare and a lot of these other British poets are buried there. And they got a little garden out the back. There was a lieutenant Simonek and myself kind of butted up together, and we went out through this little door on the side, and we found ourselves in a pretty garden. The grass was cut perfect, flowers, rose bushes and stuff, and even out there, under the patio stones, there were names and dates of Britons who were famous people who were buried in there. And the stone of Scone, which I'm sure you've heard about, was under the seat where the kings and queens received their crown on Coronation Day. It was there. Somebody stole it afterwards and brought it back later. And I got to see Piccadilly Circus. And they say if you stand on that corner long enough, everybody will pass that corner. Trafalgar Square, you heard all that. But their subways always ran, and ran on time, even with all the bombing going on.
You're talking about the Germans and what they did. What was your attitude towards the Germans and the enemy during the war?
Terry, you're put in a position where you either, if you talk about doing combat, you're put in a position where you either kill or be killed. There's no middle ground, either one way or the other. And what are you going to do? I mean, I like me first, and that's the attitude you have. And like you say, life is precious, life is cheap. You figure it out.
You mentioned Pearl Harbor Day earlier. What kind of effect did that have on you?
Well, Pearl Harbor Day, it was a Sunday. And I won't forget, I was with the 6th Cavalry then. I was a sergeant technician. And I had a little room in front of the garage. That was, in fact, there's 2 little rooms. One of them was the office, and behind that was another small room, which was my quarters. I had a cot in there and a table, and I had me a little mirror hung on the wall. I had it stripped up real homey, my foot lockers and wall clothes hanging. And that's where I lived. And they liked for me to be there because there was a telephone on the desk right outside my door. And the rest of the crew lived in a stable house, which was off to one side and back of the parking lot. And they had 2 rooms there and a bath. And it was real nice. And Pearl Harbor Day, I was laying on my bunk reading a book. The window was open. We didn't have any. There wasn't any such thing as air conditioning. So I was just laying on my bunk with the window open. I was reading a book, and the phone rang, and it was the first sergeant. He called down to the shop. He said, McCall. He said, Pearl Harbor's been bombed. And like 90% of the people in those, I say 99% of the people back then. What's Pearl Harbor? He says, you go get on the motorcycle, he says, and you go out to the rifle range, and you go out to the pistol range, cover all the ranges, and tell everybody to get in here now. So I did. I put my clothes on, got on the motorcycle, and I took off, and went to the rifle range, pistol range. It was Sunday, but they were firing. A lot of these guys were on makeup, where they had flunked the course before and they were making up. Then I got everybody to come in, and we start belting ammunition. That's when your ammunition came in boxes, and your belts came in separate boxes, and you had to put the ammunition in the belt. And we had little machines that you could get on 30 calibers. They would belt about 10 rounds at a time, and you put 10 rounds up here, and your belt was over here. You press the lever, and it pushed the rounds in, and you moved the belt, put 10 more, and kept on going. And it took about 48 hours. The colonel, the regimental commander, he called Army headquarters and said the 6th Cavalry is ready to move. But we didn't. They kept us there for a while. And I kept that for a good while. And then, as I said, we moved from there to Camp Landing, Florida. And from Camp Landing, Florida, we went to Louisiana Maneuvers. From from Louisiana maneuvers, we went back and into Camp Landing, Florida. And then we moved from there to South Carolina. And from South Carolina, that's when I left him to go to OCS. And they went overseas. I guess they went overseas from there. And I went to OCS and come out. That's when I was assigned to the 92nd Recon Battalion. In the meantime, though, like I said, after I got assigned to the 92nd Recon Battalion, that's when we got married. And see, I was a private in the Army. That's when I met Edna. And they had I don't know who sponsored it, but they had a big, huge dance in this municipal auditorium in Chattanooga. It was a big dance, and it was nice. The girls all wore long evening dresses, full-length evening gowns. And the girls were, well, some of them were debutantes, but a lot of them were store clerks, stenographers, bookkeepers, and Edna was from the telephone company. They called themselves the Liberty Bells. And anyway, I stood back in the back with a couple of my buddies. We had to be in Class A. And these girls would dance around with these guys, and I saw her, and boy, I'll tell you, she was too good looking and could dance. Wow, could she dance? And I said, man, I can't keep up with that. But anyway, I said, oh, fine, if anybody else can dance with her, I can. And I broke in and we danced, got acquainted. I had a few parlor dates. I wasn't making enough money to take her out. Oh, gee. And then when we left Fort Oglethorpe, I was gone for over a year and didn't see her. But then when I got to Fort Campbell, I don't know, they were having a big dinner dance at the officers club, and I called and invited. She came. That's when I popped the question. That was in April, and we got married in May. That was some of the good points, I'll tell you. Gee.
What kind of training did you go through at officers candidate school?
You talk about rigid. Now they call them 90-day wonders. When you get out, and you in 90-day, 3 months, you get out. If you pass everything, you're a second lieutenant. And then you wonder how the devil you did it. What happened? But in fact, when you checked in, and of course I had to shed my boots and boot breeches and put on straight leg. Everybody had to look alike. And they issued it. And I was in the 22nd class. And we didn't know what we was going to do. First thing we did, we stepped out of the class. You line up on the front walk. And we lined up out there on the front walk, and they give you a right, and you double time. There's no such thing as walking outside the building. Outside the building, you run. Everywhere you go, you run. I don't care if you're all by yourself, you run outside the building. And we had to run to class, and we took classes in military tactics, mapping, map reading. We took classes in artillery firing. We took classes in, well, you're supposed to already know how to fire a rifle and pistol when you get there. And we took classes in military law and all this kind of stuff. And of course that don't let you, excuse you from taking marches too. We marched like you wouldn't believe. And I won't forget, it was cold, it was snowing one day, and we was all lined up on the front walk. And this was standard, we were given all the standard rigid attention, and we stood there at attention, the whole company. And while this colonel come down inspecting everybody. And by the time he got to me, being tall, I was always on the back row. He got to me, one of the last guys. And by this time my face was just frozen stiff. And looked at me and he said, "Mister, what are you mad at?" My face was so screwed. I said, "Nothing, sir." And he passed on. And one of the funny things that he did, that one night I was laying in the bunk and I was reading one of the manuals. The position of a soldier at attention. It's in the manual. And I read that thing and I laughed. I said, "Anybody knows his position of a soldier at attention." But I read the book, the manual, and then would you believe it? The next day we fell out, and this lieutenant in charge of he was in charge of the company. He called my name out. "Come out here in front." And he said, "I want you to explain to the company the position of a soldier at attention." If he'd asked me anything else in the book, I couldn't have done it. But this one I did. And you start at the feet, and the position start at the feet, and you give him every joint, every muscle that go all the way to the top of the head. What's his position in relation to the rest of the body? And I said that, and I made it. He said, "Very good." He had me take my place. And one guy got busted out. He gave the command, "Half step to the rear." And there's no such command anywhere. Half step to the rear. What he wanted everybody was to take. If he'd have just said half step backwards, it would have been all right. 1/2 step backwards, it'd have been fine. But he didn't. He said half step to the rear, and they busted him out.
Out of OCS?
Huh?
Out of OCS?
He went back to being enlisted man.
Huh.
They didn't get him out of the army. And out of the original class, there was about 300 and something in the original class, over 300. And I think it was less than 100 graduated. So you could get busted out of anything. They had inspection. Now, of course, I had soldiered with a bunch of professional soldiers when I was with the 6th Cavalry. I came, and when they held this inspection, I had learned from these guys they get you a set of equipment just for inspections. In other words, you had a pair of socks, underwear, shorts, t-shirt, and don't ever wear them, but keep them in a big manila envelope, and every time they have an inspection, pull them out and set them on your bunk. And you're bound to pass because they're going to be spotlessly clean, everything's going to be all right. But this time, at night, I got down in the shower and scrubbed my raincoat. Well, my raincoat was one that had a fan tail to it, for cavalry, for horses. It had a big wide tail, so when you sat mounted on a horse, the back of your raincoat would fan out over the horse's rump. And I scrubbed that thing like you wouldn't believe. And I even took my tent pole and I sanded the tent pole so that the wood would be milk white, and I polished the brass rings around the tent poles so where they folded them up, you slip the rings up so that they would stay up. And I even had those polished. Man, when they set an inspection on a bunk, my mess kit, never used it except for inspection, this one I had, and set it out on the bunk, it was polished. Never been used to serve food in, just strictly for inspection. And this guy came around, I had my clothes hung up just like they're supposed to be in the wall locker. And he looked through my wall locker, the books in the shelf were just like they're supposed to be. Up on top of the wall locker, the books were stacked, the biggest book on the bottom and then one on up. And he come to the bunk. And he looked at it, he looked over my bunk and he tore that thing up, trying to find something wrong. And he finally come to that raincoat. And he took that raincoat and he fanned out the tail of that raincoat, and a little bit of the green rubber had been peeled off right down one of the creases. And he threw it down on the bed and said, "Dirty raincoat." What can you do? Stand there and just grin. And he went on down. He just looked me in the eye. I knew that he knew I had the best inspection he ever saw. But he went on down the line, he came back up the other side, and I don't know whether it was done on purpose or what. But the guy across the aisle from me, he inspected the guy bunk, and he had the guy at a canteen. He held that canteen up like that, and about a cup of water dribbled down right on his face, down the front of it. And I guess he wanted to see who had laughed and who wouldn't. I may have broken out in a grin, but I sure didn't laugh. It was a big, hearty guffaw like some of those guys did. And man, it was a riot. I thought that was going to break everybody up when that water poured down on his face. But and I got to that when I got to school. That all I had in my pocket was 35 cents. And they told me, said, the one thing you better have is that pair of supporters for your socks. He said, you better have your socks. You better not let them catch your socks hanging loose around your ankles. And all I had was 35 cents. So I went down to Post Exchange with my 35 cents, and I found a pair of supporters for a quarter. And I bought me a pair of supporters for a quarter, and that left me a dime. And I took a nickel and bought me a pencil, and the other nickel I bought me a little sheaf of papers. And man, that's what I started out in school with. And that's all I had. I hadn't been paid in a while. But it was good reading. Like I said, I did it then. I don't know whether I'd do it again or not. Oh man, they put you through your paces.
How long were you in OCS?
Oh, 3 months. It's not, like I say, they call us 90-day wonders. When you come out, you're a 90-day wonder. Can you imagine? They tried to cram into us in 90 days what these West Pointers take 4 years to learn. You talk about respect for a West Pointer. I always would tip my hat to a West Pointer any time. Because I had in the 6th Cavalry, I had soldiers under guys who were from West Point. My troop commander, Lieutenant Bruce Palmer, he was a West Pointer. The executive officer, Lieutenant Rush Wells, he was a West Pointer. And these guys, they walk like West Pointers. I mean, shoulders back, and man, their physique was just so. Sundays you could see the guys out there on horseback playing polo on the parade ground. And these guys were built and they talked right. They talked like West Pointers. Dressed like it. There's just something different about them. So those guys, I learned an awful lot. As a matter of fact, Lieutenant Rush Wells, I was his, for a short time on maneuvers, I was his dog robber. Well, a dog robber is just an orderly. I'm the guy, when we got to camp, my job was to go to his place, pitch his tent for him, unroll his bedroll out, make sure his boots were polished and everything was lined up, like a valet. And then leave. And then every morning we was in the field, I'd go up to his place, see that everything was straight, and then I'd straighten my own. And that worked pretty well. Now for that, he paid me $4 a month. That was a pay for a dog robber. Oh shit.
That you would like to talk about?
Oh, I don't know.
Anything that any kind of memories that are unique or special to you, or something that you remember?
Well, I told you about other things, but things that you never forget. And there's lots of good ones. Some good ones, some not so good, some bad. No more than anybody else, I guess. Of course, I like to remember the good ones, the fun I had. And there were some moments of fun. For example, like I said, when I was with this ordnance depot, working with them, being the low man on the totem pole when it comes to rank. One day an order came down that they wanted to send they wanted an officer to go to public relations school. Well, nobody wanted to go. I wasn't particularly interested in going. And finally I said, this commander I had says, well look, he said, I'll tell you what, Lieutenant, he says, you go to school, he says, we'll give you a Jeep to drive down there. And he said, you can keep the Jeep with you, go wherever you want to go, do what you want to do. And finally I said, well, where is this school? He said, oh, he said, you spend a week at the University of Paris. And this was in France. I said, University of Paris? He said, yes. He said, you live at the dormitory. And you go to classes every day. And for a week, he said, you have your evenings to yourself. Well, the classes were always over at 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And I get my little Jeep and run around Paris. And I got to see all the sights. And finally, I had a ball, but I really didn't. Nobody wanted to go. They just didn't want to be bothered with sitting in class all day long. But it was a week in Paris, which was I enjoyed it. While I was there, one morning I met a girl at the and I was in the lobby of the Hotel Louvre, which is down the street from the Plaza de the Opera House, or the Place de Opera. And I met her one evening. I was sitting there, and we got to talking. And she spoke perfect English, like the Britons do, like the British do. And come to find out, her mother was British, her father was French. There's a reason they lived in Paris. And she was crippled. She had one leg a little bit messed up. And she said, how would you like to see Paris? And of course, this leaves a big question mark on my. I said, well, she said, well, I'll tell you what. Tomorrow morning, she said, I'll meet you right here at 9 o'clock. And we'll see Paris. Well, it sounded 9 o'clock in the morning. Anyway, 9 o'clock next morning, she was right there. And I said, well, let me get a cab or one of. Oh no, she said, to see Paris you have to walk. You can't ride. And that girl walked me to death. I mean, she knew Paris. She was raised there. And every time we'd pass one of these palaces, some historic building, she could give me the whole history of it. Who was there? Now, Queen so-and-so was, her quarters were up in that window up there, and the king so-and-so caught her with such and such a guy in that courtyard over there, and she just knew all of it. And I never had so much fun in my life. And for lunch, we had lunch at one of these sidewalk cafes, and all she wanted was a bowl of soup. We had a bowl of soup and a glass of wine. That's all she wanted. And that afternoon we walked, and it was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It was one of the bridges across the Seine River. Well, she took me all through Notre Dame, the cathedral, and about 4 o'clock that afternoon. Well, she said, I've seen as much. She said, you've seen as much Paris as I had time to show you. And she said goodbye, and I never saw her again. I don't know who she was. But she really showed me that town. Like I don't guess anybody else ever got to see it. But she knew all the ins and outs, and we walked down the Champs-Élysées and Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. There's a couple of clubs. I invited her to go. We went in and had a drink. She wouldn't, no intoxicating beverages. She'd drink something else, maybe. She might drink a glass of wine, but that'd be it. One. So I enjoyed that day in Paris. It was I guess if you sit long enough, you can rehash the whole thing.
Well, how do you think being in World War II affected your life, changed you How did it develop you as a person?
Well, I tell you, you mature in a hurry, because things that before I went in the Army, I was a happy-go-lucky single guy. I drove an 18-wheeler for actually it was owned by the railroad, for a company owned by the railroad, and that's what I was doing when I was drafted in the Army. And happy-go-lucky by myself. I mean, if I decided to go somewhere, I went. If I just wanted to stay home, I went. Well, and then when I come out, why, I'm a little bit more mature. I've got a wife and a son. So you have to get busy. You have to think about a home and making a living. Of course, at that time, truck drivers were not as respected as they are nowadays. They weren't. You were just on the low bottom of the totem pole. And I come out and got me a job with an airline as an operations agent. And because I had been a radio operator in the Army at one time, the airline sent me to New Orleans, and I got me a commission as a radio operator, air to ground, ground to air, so I could talk to the passenger planes of the airline. We could talk them down to the ground. You see, we didn't have all this equipment they got nowadays. All this radar stuff. All we had was a radio, two-way radio. And when the guy, when the pilot thought he was about 3 minutes out, he called into the tower, and you sit there. He called in, and then you give him landing instruction, and that's all. Come in on the east runway, or runway so and so, and when you come in, you parked it, and that's it. I got that. Give me a good job on that. Wouldn't make any money, but I had a fancy uniform. So that's my military in a nutshell. It's really considerably condensed, but that was it. Anything else you can think of?
Well, no, that covered about every nuance.
We got. Okay.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for letting me interview you for the tape.
No, that's all right, sport. I enjoyed those days. They were happy days for me, especially when I was training as an enlisted man. When I was drafted in the Army. Now, back in the days when jobs were hard to get, and I was going from door to door, knocking on doors, asking for work. And these guys hired me, and the first thing you do start off is loading and unloading trucks, trailers, and that's all you do. And back then there was no such thing as pallets and forklifts. Everything was handled by hand. We did have the two-wheel dolly, and that was all. And then you work up from there to driving the pickup truck, and then over the road. And I did had myself worked up to where I was pulling the extra board over the road when I was drafted. And that's the very first GI uniform I ever had on. That was made. The fact is, that was made at the CCC camp, the reception center, and you notice the uniform was made of blue denim, is what it was. And look at that stupid-looking hat, and the big pockets on the side. And that was the fatigue clothes back then. And that was the very first thing that was issued to me. This was the very first, if you want to call it a dress uniform, but you notice the trousers and they looked like they were made out of horse blankets, to be honest with you, or the kind of blankets you'd use on the bed. And you notice the garrison belt. Back then we did have garrison belts, and that's what they looked like. The first issue uniform. When we went to quartermaster, they didn't check you for size. They just looked at you and threw the clothes at you, and that's what you got. And so that was the first uniform that was issued to me. And this was made after I'd been assigned to the 6th Cavalry, and they had taken the horses away, and we were mechanized. And that's one of the first Jeeps. You can see I mentioned before about the stable gang, or the mechanics now, lived in that little house you see back there in the back. That was for the mechanics now only. The rest of the troops lived up in the barracks. And we felt pretty special because we didn't have to stay in reveille, didn't have to pull a retreat, no guard duty, and as long as we just went and come and went when we wanted to, as long as we kept the vehicles running, that was good enough. We did manage to show up for mess call. Now this is after I was assigned to the 6th Cavalry Regiment. You notice now we got the boot breeches and boots, and that's about all. This is taken in the parking area of F Troop, the 6th Cavalry, on December 7th, 1941, the day Pearl Harbor was bombed. And I had to get on a motorcycle. I got a call from the office, and the first sergeant says, "Pearl Harbor's bombed, get everybody in." So I had to get on a motorcycle, go to all the rifle range, pistol range, and they were firing on Sunday, and get them all to come in, and then we started belting ammunition. Now there's myself holding a belt of 50 caliber ammunition. You know, this is summer uniform, the khakis with the boots and boot breeches. And you notice that we had the boot breeches cut down the side of the leg so that you didn't look like bloomers. Because they did. They was plucked way out beside the knees, and the boots. We'd have the boots custom with little hooks on both sides. They come originally with hooks on one side, holes on the other. We'd have a shoemaker put hooks on both sides so we could lace them up fast, and then at the back of the boot with a seam, we'd slit the top and cut the teeth off a hacksaw blade and slip them down the back so that the boots would stay straight in the back. And then when you put a high polish on them, they look really nice. But that was Pearl Harbor Day right there, December 7th, 1941. Now this is a picture of the radio operated when I was with the 6th Cavalry. The motor section, we had a radio that we kept for actual problems. When we went on maneuvers, this radio was used for real problems, not mock problems during maneuvers. And you can see the size of that transmitter and the size of the receiver. And Lord, it was, nowadays you could put the whole thing in about a cigar box, I guess. But look at that, there's one, and back then, no voice. We did use voice if we was close, but 99% of the transmissions were done by voice code and done in code. So we had to learn code and all the radio procedures. And I was pretty lucky. My call letters were my initials, LM2B. That was my call letters. This picture was taken on Louisiana maneuvers. You notice that was one of the new Juran rifles. And that's when we first started getting weapons. And notice we still had the World War I type helmet. This is taken when I went to OCS. I was with the 22nd class at Fort Knox, Kentucky, Army School. And we stayed in that school for 90 days. That's the reason we were called 90-day wonders. Because they said we went to school 90 days and then wondered what happened. And you notice that on this one, they took our garrison belts away from us, and also they took my boots and boot breeches away and gave me straight leg trousers and shoes. And that was kind of new to me. Ever made of Edna and I before we got married. We were walking down Market Street in Chattanooga, Tennessee, which is located about 10 miles north of Fort Oglethorpe. And Edna worked for the phone company. She was an operations agent. She was in the business office of the phone company. And we knew one another then, but we just walking down the street for casual acquaintance. And some street photographer took our picture. You know, the kind where you send in 50 cents and they send you a picture. And that's what we have there. A letter that I wrote home. You write it on an ordinary standard size sheet of paper, and then the Army Post Office will take that letter written on a single page, and they will photocopy it, they'll microfilm it. Back then we didn't know what might, they'd just make it down to where it's about 1/4 the size of a postage stamp. This way they could send thousands of letters home on one little reel in one box. And then when it gets home, they take and blow it up to where it's about, 5 by 6 inches or something like that. And then they mail it to the people at home. They get that mail. And this is what that is. It's called a V-mail. And you notice that it's censored. Being an officer, I could censor my own mail. They figured I'd be smart enough not to send home any information like unit designation, location, people I was with, armies I was with, anything like that. So anyway, I was privileged to do my own censoring. And during the war, I've censored thousands of enlisted men's mail. I don't know how many letters, but I couldn't tell you what was in any of them right now. And I couldn't then. When you read a couple of hundred letters, sit down one evening and read a couple of hundred letters, how are you going to remember what's in any one of them? Or who wrote it? You know, France in May of 1945, before I came home, at the Washington Club at the Hotel Louvre. And